Hello, here is the news. Today on March the 27th, a prominent businessman, the former Minister of Energy, Industry and Trade of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mukhtar Ablyazov, has been arrested. He is charged with organizing a criminal group. Mukhtar Ablyazov: I beg to believe me and be lenient towards me. Today, the head of state has signed a decree on granting pardon to Mukhtar Ablyazov. The former Minister of Energy of Kazakhstan has been appointed chairman of the board of directors of Bank Turan. Earlier, Mukhtar Ablyazov was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Bank Turan is changing its image. The large financial institution has carried out a rebranding and is now named BTA. The former head of BTA Bank is hiding in London. He fled abroad after he had been accused of embezzling bank funds in his motherland. In Kazakhstan, Mukhtar Ablyazov is charged with complicity in embezzling over $6 billion from BTA Bank and in other bank machinations. Mukhtar Ablyazov also stands charged with embezzlement in Russia and has been arrested in absentia. Sensational news came from France the night before. According to European media, Mukhtar Ablyazov was captured in the suburbs of Cannes. Kazakhstan, Russia and Ukraine are all seeking his extradition.
Время все вперед, час, миг, век, год, быстрый сказочный полет, час, миг, век, год, на вертолетах и самолетах. Кто властитель тьмы бездонной утки, тайных складов миллионных утки.
Today, in Zertas village, that is an hour's drive from Shymkent, few people remember their fellow villager, occasionally hearing his name over the radio or reading about him in a newspaper. It is here that he was born in May 1963, the man who decades later would be spoken about in all the domestic and foreign media. We've heard from old people that Ablyazov's parents used to live here. He would be discussed, condemned, searched for, found and lost again, remembered from year to year, although his name should have been consigned to oblivion and he himself sent to prison long ago. Mukhtar Ablyazov is spoken about again in Almaty, namely in the specialized inter-district court on criminal cases. It's been 8 years since the oligarch has been in Kazakhstan. He hasn't turned out today either. The seat behind the glass is empty, but in the dock there are his main accomplices, at least according to the prosecution. Sadwakas Mamesh, Kairat Sadikov and Jakselig Jairimbatov don't want attention of the press and ask the judge to ban photo and video filming. They prefer to speak privately about their relations with the man who has destroyed their lives. At that moment, all of us were scared by what was going on and didn't understand anything. I regret a lot that I worked there in that period of time. He doesn't spare anyone for achieving his goals, neither himself nor his loved ones, no one at all. Ruthless, ambitious, having a mathematical habit of mind and a great chess player. He had a real gift of persuasion. Thousands of people believed him and then regretted 8,000 times. But all this is in the past. Now the banker with a high tempo has to give his spiel only on the internet. In his native land, Ablyazov is being waited for with handcuffs on. It's becoming more difficult to believe his words. There are new evidences, witnesses and accomplices give testimony. An enormous mosaic of fraud forms a single picture. Almaty streets still keep memories. Somewhere here he walked or drove. In this building he contrived his artful plans and pumped billions. It has been a long time since the three letters disappeared from the glass high-rise building in the center of the city. But the echo of past undertakings of BTA Bank and its officials is still haunting its twisted corridors. Almost everything has changed here over the years. The only place spared by time is the conference hall. It is in this room on the 12th floor where Ablyazov devised his intricate schemes that would later take up hundreds of pages of materials of a criminal case. As a result of those schemes, both his subordinates and all Kazakhstan people would suffer in the end. Almost everything has remained here in its primordial type: furniture, company logo, memorable letters of commendation on the wall. Ablyazov liked praises and letters of commendation. When there wasn't enough of public attention in Kazakhstan, he went further. These images were filmed in Moscow 10 years ago. Global Finance Award was presented there and Turan Alem received the nomination of the Bank of the Year in the CIS. It is the elite of our bank community. In the world they call it the best practice models. High-ranking politicians and businessmen praised, admired and spoke about the prospects of the financial institution of Kazakhstan. But none of them realized that all the achievements of the bank were not more than a soap bubble. The statuette was given to Roman Solotchenko, the former chairman of the board of Turan Alem. Roman Solotchenko. It was a pleasant surprise to us and another confirmation that, as I have already told, the strategy we chose several years ago proves to be right and obtained recognition. A strategy that obtained recognition in 2007 would make Solotchenko leave the country 2 years later. He would hide in Great Britain together with Ablyazov. According to the data provided by the Prosecutor General's office, Solotchenko was granted asylum in the UK in 2012. Ablyazov liked England. He had large impressive real estate in London amounting to £63 million, which is over 24 billion in terms of tenge. Having knocked up a fortune in his native land at other people's expense, the banker lived in luxury. Scrooge McDuck was perhaps the first oligarch seen by the children of many generations. The billionaire duck from the old Disney cartoon resembles the fugitive Kazakh banker, though Uncle Scrooge is a positive character in contrast to Ablyazov and earned an honest penny. Scrooge McDuck. Well, not bad for half-a-day work. Now it's time to rest. Ablyazov also liked to rest, for example in elite London apartments in Albert Court. There he had a gym and a swimming pool, but an apartment is of course not a patch of mansions. Is Carlton House. There are 9 bedrooms, a spacious assembly room, a library, a swimming pool and a Turkish bath there. It's impossible to count all options. The fugitive banker also owned a 40-hectare ground area in Oaklands Park, 8 houses, a nursery garden, lakes, tennis courts and a helipad. However, the High Court of London took a decision to sell that property. London was not just a temporary refuge for Ablyazov. According to his partners, he planned to extend the bank massively and establish its headquarters in the capital of Great Britain. Small wonder then that he fled there as a result. Later, Mukhtar Ablyazov insisted on his associates coming to the foggy Albion. Taking into account the fact that I was directly in charge of the bank during the final year, and many people were subordinate to me, as well as knowing my character, he apparently decided that it would be safer for him if I was next to him there. Yaksilik Jairimbatov used to be one of the principal assistants of Ablyazov. He headed the credit committee of the bank. He got acquainted with his future boss early in 2000s. He admits that he admired Ablyazov's working style. We came to Almaty from the regions, saw how they worked there and left full of enthusiasm. After communicating with them, it seemed to us that we did nothing at all. They were active and ambitious, and it seemed to us that they were doing some advanced aerobatics there. Zhairim Batov was among top managers of BTA. March of 2000 caught him flat-footed. I was on leave on March the 2nd and was sleeping at home. I was absolutely not ready. He called me and asked if I didn't watch TV and that it was time to leave. After that, of course, I left. I came to London in 2009, not knowing the language, not knowing anyone there, without a family. Where could I go? I went to him. What could I do? He provided financial support, paid salary to me. Ablyazov provided financial support to everyone who had been with him all the way. He rented property for them and paid considerable monthly fees. He tried to convince his subordinates that all the hardships would end soon. He was convinced that he would soon come back to power in his country, or at least he would return. He used to describe the cycles in his life. He used to say, "When I was in prison, you didn't believe that I would come back. But I came back. I really had to leave Britain." But he didn't return home. 3 years later, they realized in London who had been hiding under the disguise of a persecuted fugitive. The banker was at once deprived of that status and fled again. The Prosecutor General's Office of the Republic of Kazakhstan sent a request to Great Britain to extradite Ablyazov, and the High Court sentenced him to 22 months in prison, finding him guilty of contempt of court. Maurice Key, a High Court judge in London. It's difficult to imagine a litigant acting with more cynicism, mercenary resourcefulness and insincerity in relation to orders of court than Ablyazov. But Handers, a High Court judge in London. Ablyazov's arguments against the lawsuit of BTA were improbable, inconsistent and openly incredible. The assets of BTA currently amount to $24 billion. Its total equity capital is $3,600 million. Many Russians and even European lending agencies can envy it. Mukhtar Ablyazov had come to Turan 2 years before these events. In 2005, the bank was not in good shape. Its capital made up 38 billion tenge. The swindler was not satisfied at all with such state of affairs. Namely, at that moment, his lending stories started arising. Just over 3 years, Ablyazov 8 times increased the authorized capital stock of BTA. So wherein did the criminal scheme lie? How could an ordinary entrepreneur from the backwoods scrape up an enormous fortune? In fact, there was nothing unusual in the banker's fraudulent plan. Rather, commonplace ideas were concealed under the mask of a brilliant financial swindler. Ablyazov's fraud scheme was as follows. He issued loans to his own companies, which then brought up the bank's shares. BTA gave loans to a number of enterprises that were out of range of Kazakhstan's controlling agencies. Those offshore enterprises belonged to Ablyazov. It means that he lent his own money to himself and brought up the assets of Turan. As the bank seemed developing and prosperous to investors, they started investing real money. Sergei Perov, the head of the investigation department of the Anti-Corruption Service of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Ablyazov is just a thief and fraudster who cheated ordinary citizens, pension funds, bank clients, displaying a virtual success of the bank. His principal aim was to attract more money and commit a large-scale embezzlement. Ablyazov embezzled over 1 trillion tenge. Ablyazov had successfully implemented his scheme over 3 years. The banker started a completely new, beautiful life. The oligarch denied himself nothing. He used the stolen money for purchasing movable and immovable property, for instance private planes, where he arranged gatherings. Black caviar, expensive champagne and a little tipsy Ablyazov. One can judge by these pictures how the billionaire spent his free time. Unscrupulous, accurate and calculating, he stole from both foreign investors and ordinary Kazakh people. Sergei Perov, the money stolen by Ablyazov belonged to ordinary Kazakh people who entrusted them with their savings. Pension funds that deposited pension benefits in BTA Bank suffered the same fate. Kazakhstan and foreign investors also fell for Ablyazov's trick and deposited their funds. When in 2009 both the oligarch and the money disappeared, the economy of Kazakhstan found itself on the verge of a crisis. BTA was one of the major banks of the country. That was the aim of the cunning fraudster. Over the years he had inflated an enormous soap bubble, turned over his own assets in order to convince everyone that Turan Alem was really developing. The investors believed those fairy tales and invested real money that Ablyazov transferred to his own accounts. As the financial collapse of the major bank could be fatal for the whole economy of Kazakhstan, the state had to intervene. The debts of BTA running into billions were paid off from the budget. The people not related to Ablyazov, Kazakhstan taxpayers, ordinary citizens had to pay Ablyazov's bills. All this took place at the time of the world financial crisis. At that critical moment, the swindler snapped off a large piece of the common pie. Ablyazov pumped out $7.5 billion from Kazakhstan. Legal proceedings against Ablyazov and BTA in Kazakhstan lasted for 8 years. 38 of his associates were convicted over the period. The fugitive banker's fraud turned out badly to many of his subordinates. Some of them didn't suspect any embezzlement, others had some guesses but went on following the chief's instructions. By his escape, Ablyazov destroyed many lives. The bankers didn't understand at once that their former boss had framed them up. But everyone understands clearly that if it hadn't been for him, their life would have been quite different. It should be noted that many of those who played their part in Ablyazov's fraud schemes have never even seen him. I had no direct contact with him. I'm an ordinary specialist and had no connections with the authorities. I had never seen Mukhtar Ablyazov. I have never had any direct contact with him. A special group of people appear in this case. In the professional slang, they are called 65s. They are the people who have repented, assisted the prosecutors, and as a result freed themselves from criminal prosecution. Rustam Abdeshev, the former head of the corporate business department of BTA Bank. At that moment, we didn't suspect anything. We worked out all the applications, and then it became known that the man had left. Luisa Aitipaeva, the head of the legal department of BTA Bank. Turan Alem was the leading bank. The work was dynamic. All of us were committed to the work we did. Gulnara Tleukulova, the former managing director of BTA Bank. I performed my rounds of duties. I think I worked for the good of the bank, for the benefit of the banking system of Kazakhstan. Each of these people has his own story, but all of them are intertwined on the three cherished letters and on the merciless man. At the beginning, Ablyazov and BTA were the pride of their life, and then they turned into a nightmare. Zoria Kuanbekova, the former head of the Department of Legal Maintenance of Corporate Business of BTA Bank. I came home from work at 9 to 10 p.m. I worked at the weekends. Now this is the result. Zoria Kuanbekova had worked in BTA as a lawyer since 1996. After Ablyazov had escaped, her quiet and measured life was over. You can't call it anything but treachery. The banker involved more and more people into his criminal network and exploited each of them for the sake of one thing: increasing his own capital. Zoria Kuanbekova, the former head of the Department of Legal Maintenance of Corporate Business of BTA Bank. Every time heading for negotiations, I was not sure if I would return home. Do you understand what it was like? 8 years of endless horror. Who will stay with my child? How will she return home alone? Long hours in the office of investigators, hundreds of sheets of paper covered with written evidence. Again and again these people have to recall all the details of their work in BTA. Nobody knows how each new visit to familiar offices will end. The only person to be blamed for all this is the artful fraudster who exploited other people for achieving his own goals. The life of some of them after BTA took another shape, but all the same ended in the office of investigators. Svetlana Nachinkina worked with the documents for credit files and was not the last person in the fraud scheme. The woman hid from Kazakhstan prosecutors for the whole year. All that time, she lived in Moscow. Svetlana Nachinkina, the former head of the investment and documentary department of BTA Bank. I realized that I could not and did not want to hide long, because I had left my family here. So I wrote an application for a voluntary return, and now I'm here. After the escape of Ablyazov, the managers of BTA assiduously covered their tracks. One of the main components of their cleanup was to protect all the accomplices from communicating with investigators. They worked out a simple but effective scheme. The bankers that had been involved in the dark business of their boss were grouped into a bus and taken to Bishkek. They designated a special man who gave a detailed guidance and explained what to do and what to tell. Besides, he intimidated the runaways, telling them that they were going to be arrested and imprisoned at home. In such a way, Ablyazov got rid of the witnesses. After being brainwashed, the workers of BTA left Kyrgyzstan in different directions. The same thing happened to Kairat Sadikov. He had been hiding in Kiev for 7 years. The former director for lending issues had met the great fraudster Ablyazov only twice. But that was enough to leave an irreparable mark on the fate of Sadikov and his family.
Старшие дети у меня остались с родителями, и практически они выросли без меня, на руках у родителей.
Kairat Sadikov, the former director for lending issues of BTA Bank. My eldest children stayed with my parents and grew out without me. My wife and youngest daughter left with me. At that time, all this was stressful for us, for our parents, for my children and for me. My daughter got seriously ill, and all these years I devoted to her treatment. In the beginning, Ablyazov did not forget about the fugitives. Everyone who had left the country lived at his expense. But that did not make them feel better. They came to realize that sooner or later the pawns at this game of the brilliant chess player would be sacrificed. Kairat Sadikov, the former director for lending issues of BTA Bank. Of course, it was difficult to live far from the motherland and relatives, having no documents. It was very difficult and very stressful. At some point, hard life at the expense of others was over. The people used by Ablyazov for implementing his fraud schemes turned into worked-out material. Sergei Perov, Ablyazov simply exploited people for realizing his criminal plans. He needed them at a certain period of his life to commit such a large-scale crime. Eventually, he did not need them anymore. Needless, exploited and penniless, the fugitives started thinking of returning home. Kairat Sadikov did namely this. He returned home and appeared before the court. He pleaded guilty in part as well as Sadwakas Mamesh, but the latter played a more significant role in the BTA case. He was the chairman of the board in the bank and worked closely with Mukhtar Ablyazov. It was Mamesh who devised the illegal scheme for increasing the capital. Sadwakas Mamesh, the former chairman of the board of BTA Bank. I was aware of the activity concerning the capital increase because at the time I did not consider it to be criminal. I thought it was only violation of bank legislature from the point of view of norms. Subsequently, when the volumes started increasing with a great number of projects being financed, it became clear that we violated the norms. In principle, this was why I left the bank. Mamesh left, but questions remained unanswered. Later, he would actively cooperate with investigators and help BTA to retrieve approximately 300 million of stolen dollars. But that did not save him from accusations of embezzlement and illegal use of the bank funds. Said Wakas Mamesh, "I regret a lot that I worked in the bank at that time." In Almaty, in Dostik Avenue, behind a high fence, there is a house hidden from the public eye. It is difficult to call it a house. It's a real estate. Besides the main mansion, there are several guest houses, garages, a swimming pool and a playground here. In the spacious plot you can come across statues. Twisting paths lead to shady summer houses, behind which there is a river with a bridge over it. But the past luxury has declined. All this is the creation of the former Almaty mayor, Akim Viktor Krapunov. Sergei Perov. At that time, this house was the residence of the mayor of Almaty, but the then mayor Krapunov privatized it, after which it belonged to his spouse and subsequently became Ablyazov's property. At some moment, the two high-ranking gentlemen became connected with family bonds. The banker's daughter married the mayor's son. The fathers-in-law saw further business prospects in this marriage. When the High Court of London prohibited Ablyazov to use his assets around the world, he devised another fraud scheme. He decided to hide and then legalize the stolen funds, shares and property with the help of his son-in-law. Ilyas Krapunov turned out to be an ideal variant in this regard. At the time, Ablyazov was not under prosecution in Kazakhstan, Russia and Ukraine. But the son of the former mayor could not use the entrusted money independently. Any transaction was to be endorsed personally by Ablyazov. The dirty money was invested in the elite property in Europe and USA, as well as in oil and gas companies in Africa. Both families, united by marriage, illegal business and Almaty mansion, are in a similar situation now. Once a prominent politician, Viktor Krapunov and his spouse, a luxurious business lady, Leila, are hiding in Switzerland. The former minister gives interviews in which he tries to convince everyone that he is a victim. In an expensive suit, beautiful glasses and many millioned accounts in a bank. The source of his income did not dry up when he was the mayor of Almaty. Krapunov loaded himself with a heavy burden. He rid the city of some hectares of land. He sold profitably the plots of land in mountainous districts and sometimes in conservation zones. Leila's business, luxury boutiques of elite clothes and jewelry saloons, also brought some profit to the family budget. In the intervals between difficult day-to-day activities, the golden couple liked to tell about their life. Leila Krapunova. Concerning mobile phones, the time of our communications with each other are the happiest moments for us. Especially now we miss our elder children. The happiest moments for us are the moments when we are together. Little has changed in their lives since they fled for Switzerland. Their children have grown up and went into business as well. Ilyas, like his parents, is fond of attention of the press. He has got the status of the youngest millionaire of Switzerland. His fortune totals 8 zeros with a modest foreign front. Ilyas Krapunov. Welcome to our apartments. A splendid view of the lake opens here. It's impossible to build such apartments in Almaty. Villa in Geneva looks much better and sounds more prestigious. Ilyas Krapunov. There are people who have a stereotype regarding Kazakhstan that money is mafia-controlled and dirty there. I think one day we will clarify the situation. Ilyas conducts a tour around the luxury rooms and demonstrates his not less luxurious spouse. Madina Ablyazova doesn't feel alien in this family. Her father resembles Krapunov too much. Besides, after the couple robbed Kazakhstan of millions of dollars, the former mayor hurriedly defected to the side of his new relative. The two fugitives and their families are now trying to support each other in everything and together play a role of persecuted members of the opposition. Viktor Krapunov. I left the system that I couldn't bear anymore. I have never had bank accounts in Switzerland. My wife's account had been blocked. It's true. We will prove that accusations of money laundering are groundless. The only difference between the ex-mayor and the ex-banker is perhaps in the number of zeros on their bank accounts. Kropanov managed to pump out $300 million from Almaty, while Ablyazov stole billions. August of 2013 happened to be full of sensations. The European media reported that Mukhtar Ablyazov had been captured at his villa in France. After 4 years of search and persecution, the ex-head of BTA had been tracked down at last. The special operation on his capture was carried out swiftly, and mass media already spread around a picture of Mukhtar Ablyazov in a white undershirt, shorts and handcuffs. Later in the French prison, he would recount the details of his arrest on his own website. "I was at home working when I heard a helicopter hovering around 300 meters away from my house. Suddenly the door opened and a strange masked man with a Winchester rifle in his hands bent down and ran into the room. Some more special squad soldiers ran into the room. They were also scared, armed with rifles, as if expecting an armed resistance. I don't know what they had been told at the briefing, but it seems they were very frightened. They handcuffed and blindfolded me. Everything was done to the maximum degree possible, but even after that they were still scared, as they drove me as a dangerous terrorist expecting an attack at any time." Ablyazov spent more than 3 years in the French prison. All that time, Russia and Ukraine sought his extradition. The banker is convicted of a range of crimes there too. Kazakhstan had no chances for extradition as it had no extradition treaty with France. In spring 2015, the court in France made the final decision and issued an extradition order to Moscow. Everything seemed to be over at last. A plane, Sheremetyevo, interrogations, trial and prison. But the procedure was delayed in the Fifth Republic, and a year and a half later Mukhtar Ablyazov went at large, holding his head proudly and smiling. France's highest administrative court cancelled the extradition order on the ground that Russia had a political motive in making the extradition request. A groundless, pointless and preposterous circle closed up again. In Ablyazov's native village, his parents are still remembered. However, only older generation keep memories. The old men say the father of the future oligarch used to be a good man. Everyone respected Kabul. He used to work as an engineer in the local collective farm. A son was born. He was Mukhtar. We were friends. We used to work together. The old house of the Ablyazovs has been pulled down long ago. A new one has been built in its place. They have never seen the oligarch here. It's difficult to imagine him going down from luxury European mansions to this village, native land. Mukhtar Ablyazov, I beg to believe me and be lenient towards me. Ablyazov recorded this video message in remote 2003 when he was imprisoned. The authorities believed and took compassion on the offender, and he was released. The fugitive oligarch lives in France, now making no efforts to hide. Here he is posing at the Eiffel Tower, making comments on the Russian meetings, giving interviews. But at this time in Almaty, he's being tried in absentia. The procedure is going to be difficult. Over 2,000 sections case file contains the materials on the BTA embezzlement case. They had to allocate several rooms for keeping all the folders. On these shelves there are evidences, memories, conclusions and resumes of dozens of people. The organized criminal community consisted of over 100 participants, 100 people who somehow or rather, voluntarily or not, found themselves on the same checkboard with the king, Ablyazov, and only he has managed to win the game. 24 accomplices are still wanted by the international police, but also understand that it's time to go back home. Sergei Perov, some of them currently apply to us through their lawyers and are ready to return to Kazakhstan. Far away from their motherland, without means of subsistence, they are conscious of their guilt. In turn, we are ready to do everything we can to return them home. Moreover, we call on the rest wanted criminals to come back to Kazakhstan. The luxurious but dilapidated mansion in Almaty is likely to be sold after the trial. But Jairin Betov, Sadikov and Mamesh will have to be announced the sentence without their genius boss. Would you like to send any message to him? Yes, return to the country. It's not too bad here. Dear future. Hello, today the ex-head of BTA Bank, disgraced businessman and oligarch Mukhtar Ablyazov is to be taken to Almaty by special flight. He fled Kazakhstan in 2009 when the details of a colossal embezzlement came out. Ablyazov is accused of having embezzled over $7 billion.